America in Revelation, and what is America's future? Future? Like in Revelation. Is America in Revelation, and what is America's future in Revelation? America is not in Revelation, and our future is like everybody else in the world. There are two ways of looking at the book of Revelation. One way is to take the book of Revelation. There's a lot of stuff there, and look out at the world and say, that must be that. Oh, that must be this. Do you remember Gorbachev? Remember Gorbachev had that birthmark or whatever it was? You know, kind of a purple spot somewhere on his head. People thought for sure that, you know, that was something prophetic, that Gorbachev was maybe something to do with, he was a Russian leader, if any of you remember back at the time. I don't even know how you spell Gorbachev. So let me just erase that, but that's an example of people taking like the beast or 666. I actually pastored a church for many years where the entire church's goal of many of the families was that when their children were born, they hired lawyers because they would not allow their children to get a social security number. And it was, everyone talked about it. Every time you were around church, they were all talking about, well, I found a better lawyer and we cannot have a social security number. We can't have a social security number because social security numbers are the mark of the beast. And so the social security number was taboo. Isn't that interesting? Maybe the Antichrist will use social security numbers. I don't know, but it's not avoiding. I mean, other people wouldn't use credit cards because they said, oh, credit cards are bad. I mean, it's just like there are other people that saw the signs of the Antichrist and everything, like the Gulf oil, you know, symbol had some kind of satanic overtone to it. You know, the Starbucks, that funny mermaid thing, that's got something bad in it. And there's just people, they're trying to pick all of the metaphors of Revelation and tie them to something in society. So is American Revelation? No. No more than France is, no more than Japan is. Now, are there geographic places in Revelation? Yes, there are. In fact, in Revelation, and we have 2 minutes. I mean, what you find is Jerusalem is the center of what's going on, and there is the king of the west, which probably is the beast, the Antichrist, Western Europe. There's the king of the north, and we're talking about the climactic ending of the battlefield is a 4-part march on Jerusalem. The kings of the south. So actually, yes, there are, and there are the kings of the east. And actually, China is actually, the ancient name of China is actually in the book of Isaiah, that there is a mention of the kings of the east, which is one of the early titles of China. The kings of the north, which could either be Russia or the Soviet Union or the Stans. The kings of the south, which it's fascinating how Israel, all of the descendants of Ishmael and Esau are all, you know, south in some direction from Israel. And then of course the Antichrist in the west. But back to this. And I think we should pick up on this. What is America's future according to Revelation? Well, what's sad is Revelation 3 tells us that the hallmark of the last days is when the church gets rich, increased with goods, and are so busy with all their trinkets that they don't have time for God. I know people that got to Star Wars hours early so they could be the first one to be in the first screening. And they stood in line for 2+ hours. And then they sat through a 145-minute, whatever it is, I don't know how long it was. It was long. 2 hours plus, I think. And those same people thought that cover to cover or any Bible reading program is tedious because it takes 15 minutes a day. Yet when it's something they love, they can stand in line for hours, sit for hours, and pay $18 for a ticket, getting free popcorn during their movie. If you want the Bible and want to know how America is in the future, the worst thing for anybody is prosperity. For every person that is prosperous, the Puritans used to put it this way. They say 99 people can go through adversity and not deny their faith, but only 1 out of 100 can stay godly through prosperity. Now, the Puritans were really down on prosperity because they felt Revelation 3 says when you're rich and increased in goods and don't have need of anything, you have less and less time for God and you're more distracted by everything else. So, what I think is going to happen to America is that America is increasingly going to go the way we're going. Churches are going to be entertainment driven. They're going to be what we call seeker friendly, which means you don't offend anybody but God. You don't see anything that offends the people. You have diminution of the service. You make them simpler, you make them funner, you make them shorter. Bible studies used to be 1 hour. Now, the modern ones, the cutting edge ones are telling me 20 minutes? Can you cut them in half? People won't sit for more than 20 some minutes. I said, really? They go, mm-hmm. And they say, can you show some music videos as illustrations? Because they are used to that. I go, that's where we've gotten. And people wonder why they're anxious and peace is distant from them. It's because America is not in Revelation, because I think we're going to implode for many reasons. And the future I see us as this Laodicean church, that we're blind and poor and miserable and naked and far from God. And I think America is just losing its spirituality and they just have a form of godliness. Where is America in Revelation? And that was the first question. I would add to that, so the book of Revelation we're talking about, is America mentioned in the book of Revelation? That's number one. But number two, also, where is America just not even in one book, but in prophecy? And I think that's significant for us to think about and to ponder how we live in an age where the Lord said the chief characteristic of the age in which we would live. In fact, since we're doing Q&A from the Bible, let's go to Matthew 24. Let me show you one thing. The chief characteristic of the end times, Jesus mentions over and over and over again in his longest sermon on prophecy. Remember, Jesus is the one that is the spirit of prophecy. The spirit of prophecy is what Jesus is all about. He is the one who wants us to know what's coming, what's happening. And so he inaugurates prophetic studies in the New Testament by Matthew 24, which is repeated in Mark 13, which is repeated in an abbreviated form in chapter 21 of Luke. So all of the synoptic gospels have this prophetic factor. And then, of course, the Apostle John wrote so much in the book of Revelation and 1 John about the future. But look what it says, starting in verse 4, take heed that no one what? In verse 4 of Matthew 24, no one what? Deceive you. Okay, verse 5, many will come in my name saying, I'm the Christ, and will what? Deceive many. Verse 11, many false prophets will rise up and what? Deceive many. And keep going down to verse 24. For false Christ and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to what? Deceive. So the important thing to think about whenever you get into anything prophetic is that the key element of the last days is religious deception. And what Jesus said, who never exaggerates and always speaks the truth, and his truth is that there are going to be many, verse 5, many are going to say, I'm coming in Christ's name. Many will say, I am the Christ, and believe it or not, people will believe him and will be deceived. So as we go into this discussion, remember we're going into a place that is fertile, that is ripe, that is filled with, just look at the internet. Just search Google for American prophecy. I mean, there's a good one, American prophecy, and you will get an immense amount to sift through, laced with, all kinds of interesting stuff. So watch out for deception. And the way that you know a deceiver is they usually have something off on the doctrine of Christ, or they're adding to the scriptures, or they're inconsistent with the whole. If you remember last Sunday morning, the triangle on its nose and saying that all 3,101 verses of the Bible should have weight upon any individual verse in the Bible. In other words, whenever we're talking about prophecy, salvation, church polity, anything, parenting, marriage, daily life, any verse that we pick, we should find an analogia scriptura, a consistency with the whole, that God would never say anything in part that would be in disagreement with any of the other parts. See, that's the consistency of Scripture, and that's the challenge, okay? So let's go through America in prophecy starting in Revelation. And let me just show you a few places that people say, and I would not agree with this, but I'll just show you what's out there. Revelation 12. So let's go there first. People see America in Revelation 12. And good people, Christians, a lot of times people are so zealous to read the current events into the Scripture. So Revelation 12:13 onward, I'll read to you. Now what we see in there is right in the middle of the parenthetical explanation of things that are going to happen in the future. Starting in verse 13, it says, now when the dragon, let's just keep the characters here, the dragon, which all of a sudden sounds like we're in Lord of the Rings or something, or some fairy tale. The dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth. He persecuted the woman who gave birth to the child. We're really already, there are so many images here, so many metaphors, so many illustrations. People can go wild to the child, which is the male child, which is Christ. But to the woman was given two wings of A, and there it is, verse 14, eagle. What is the American symbol? The bald? So there's America. Look what it says. And so, two wings of the eagle. Probably it's the 1st Air Force and the 2nd Air Force, or maybe it's a C-17, whatever. And immediately, the eagle, it's America. And so then, they have to make all of this be America rescuing Israel, using our Air Force or something like that. And they fly her into the wilderness. And of course, it has to be us, because we have the largest Air Force in the world, And I was telling Bonnie today, if the tribulation happens anytime soon, where is America in the tribulation? We're the world's largest arms exporter. We export more military gear than all the rest of the exporters combined. We spend 80% of all the expenses on warfare in the world. Our country spends it. No one in history has spent the amount of money on armaments and 600-ship Navy, and we could go on and on. So, immediately the eagle becomes the USA. Now what that is, though, there are two ways you can look at the Bible. There is eisegesis and there is exegesis. Eis means into, ex means out of. So, what that means is when you're looking at the scriptures, here is the Bible. And you can either read current events into the Bible and say, USA, biggest military in the world. We could go on. we can all brag. We do have the most amazing military accomplishments. I mean, CENTCOM, USCOM, all the coms. We have headquarters for our military covering every continent of the world. Nobody can do that. I mean, we just are everywhere and spending $1 billion a month on every one of the aircraft carriers. And I don't know how many of them there are, but just that alone is in excess of the military budget of even Russia. Just what we spend on our aircraft carriers is more than all of Russia spends on anything. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable, but because of America being so big, we read an eiseget, an AS, which means it's a preposition, and eiseget reads into the Bible, America. That's not proper biblical interpretation. We are supposed to be exegetical, that you let the Bible speak outward and explain itself. So what is the ego? Do y'all remember the Exodus? Let's go back to Exodus chapter 19. I'll just show you. This is the first lesson you have to take in hermeneutics and eschatology in seminary. But look at Exodus 19 and let's discover who is the ego. And the Lord says in chapter 19, 3rd month they came out of Egypt, verse 1, they departed Rephidim, verse 2, Moses went up to God, verse 3, and the Lord starts talking in verse 3. Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel, you have seen, verse 4, what I did to the Egyptians and how what does your Bible say? Bore you on what? Oh, there's America again, right? I think that we helped the Jews get out of captivity in Egypt because it's on what? Eagle's wings. Now see, and we could go to further on in Deuteronomy 32. It's a very similar idea. But basically if the Bible, if the analogia, if the scriptures explain the scriptures, then what will happen is that any of these biblical allusions or metaphors or symbols that are in the Bible, another part of the Bible will explain them. Rather than us having to go out like one industrious prophetic online place does. And they say, well, the 42 months of Revelation means that in 1798, something happened in Europe and it lasted until, and they start calculating how many months. And they try and read from events in history and try and make it fit with the Bible. So what I'm saying is Revelation 12, the eagle is God. God is one that rescues them. So that is not to be thought of as America. Here's another one that is not America. Look at chapter 18. Revelation 18 is Mystery Babylon, Babylon the Great. And chapter 18 talks about this amazing, commercial, materialistic something called Babylon. And all of Revelation 18 is about this Babylon. Now remember, Babylon is a city. It's still there. You know, it's in Iraq. It's also the first empire. When God who knows the end from the beginning, who sees everything at once, God says that in the history of the world, there are only going to be, and he already knows how it ends, by the way, there only are going to be 4 empires. Did you know that? And America is not one of them. And neither is Russia. Neither is China. Neither is Great Britain. You understand? We already know the empires of the world. God has already said in Daniel 2 that until his kingdom is established and destroys man's kingdoms, there will be 4. And they are Babylon, and then the Medo-Persian, and then the Greek, and then the Roman. I mean, that is in the scriptures clear as day. Daniel 2, Daniel 7 repeated. So Babylon was the first empire. So it's not just a city, it was an empire. You know, Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and to bed we go. That's what I used to think it was. My parents would always say, let's have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and to bed we go. And I always thought when I was little that meant to bed we go. Because, you know, we always went to bed after the Bible story. But no, it's a bed we go. But you remember Daniel and the lion's den? That's Babylon. That's an empire. That was the first of the 4 empires. And this encompasses all of human history. And so is America in prophecy. And I'll come back to that because this is very interesting, the Roman Empire and what's happened to it. But is Revelation 18 equal America? In the sense, is America Babylon? No. But does America appear this and act this way? It certainly does. We probably look at verse 3. For the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and kings of the earth committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. United States, our equity markets, our derivatives, our everything. No nation in the history of the world has been as wealthy as we are. Now it's electronic wealth and it's paper wealth and it's not based on a lot of stuff. But it sure is great and it's working right now. And we're experiencing a standard of living no one had. I just read a piece in I don't know where, the Wall Street or New York Times, that talked about what a typical person living in an apartment. You walk in your apartment and a light goes on. You flip a light, you walk to the sink, you turn your faucet and warm and cold water, even hot water comes out. You turn another one in gas, which is only $2.19 a cubic foot, which is really low, and can you imagine? We have such commodities available to us coming right into our apartment, and it took just what is in a normal one-bedroom apartment, and this article counted how many workers it would take to go out in the woods and cut down a tree and split it and build a fire and warm the water that was carried from either a well or a river or somewhere else. and the ones that keep the fire going and to pour the water into the pot to warm it up and then to carry it into your house when you wanted warm water, and then to, get rid of the ashes and keep cutting more wood. But that's just the ones that were doing the warm water. We're talking about hot water at any instant in your house. Now that's just the water. What about the air, the heat that's going through? What about the lights? And it talked about how many people you would have to have working for you all the time to just be the conveniences that a normal $400 or $500 a month apartment, or $600, whatever they are, costs. And then you talk about our food. Wow. To be able to have fresh beef, you've got to have people out guarding those cows. You have to have more that are leading them and regularly butchering them, but you don't want it to spoil and for you to have fresh. And so what I'm saying is, we live in a time right now, normal apartment dwellers are living better than kings and queens lived in centuries back. They did not have central heating. They did not have central anythinging. They had people that were moving everything in and out, and the food and everything. So look at what it says. The merchants were rich through the abundance, verse 3, of our luxury. And then it starts talking about all the luxuries that's going on. And so basically, Revelation 18 and Mystery Babylon is not America. And again, I could take you back to the Old Testament, to the minor prophets, where it talks about Babylon and the storks and the lead tablets and the basket and the basket the storks bring with the lid on it and they take it off. What is all that? It's talking about this whole idea of commercialism, of materialism, of wanting all these slaves, of all these conveniences. What's the characteristic of the tribulation time? There are people that are buying and selling and enjoying gold. Verse 12, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory. Wow. I thought that was protected. It's not if you're wealthy. The whole smugglers, poachers thing. If you have enough money in some country, I know not in America because we have all the border, watching for what's being brought into our country. But the wealthy people of the less civilized than American countries, if you want ivory, you can have ivory. Just go kill some more elephants and leave them, take their tusk off of them. But look, even in the tribulation, people are getting objects of ivory, every kind of object of precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, and you can read the list for yourself. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and the things from which you had were that were rich. So Revelation 18 is about materialism. Materialism, commercialism, something that became, remember what Babylon was in Daniel's image? Do you all remember? Say yes or no. The head of gold, yeah. Go back to Daniel chapter 2 and you remember this statue. The first empire was the wealthiest. Babylon, Daniel chapter 2, and you notice that God talks about them, the head of gold, and then the chest, and basically the thorax here of silver, and then the bronze, and then the iron. Basically, the material gets less precious in each empire. It goes from gold to silver, and of course silver is great, but gold is better, and silver is great. Bronze is great, but silver is better than bronze as far as in value, and iron, is cheap, and bronze is a little more, and silver is more, and gold is more. But gold, you can bite it. Remember the westerns where you bite it? It's so soft you can actually sink your teeth into it. You can't do that with silver. You break your teeth with bronze and, iron crushes stuff. And so there's an increasing strength of the empires and a decreasing wealth. And the Babylonian commercialism, the first empire, was fabulously, fabulously wealthy, the head of gold. And so this is not America, and I could go on, but watch out for people that say that America is in Revelation 12. America's not the eagle. God is the eagle. America's not Mystery Babylon. We're very infected by it. We're very materialistic. We're very commercial, but it's not there. Now, where is America? Well, let's go back to Ezekiel because you're in Daniel. Back up to Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 39, because this is interesting. If we were having a question and answer that was just yes or no, and someone said, is America in prophecy? I'd say no. So that's the answer. But I'm going on. But this is interesting. And this is historic. And this is something that Bible scholars and prophecy scholars have talked about. It's Ezekiel 39 and it's verse 6. And you know what 39 is about? Behold, I'm against you, verse 1, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. And even a rudimentary search of those would give you a geographic area that is far north of Israel. And that is historically the home of the Scythians. Scythians must have not paid enough rent on this thing. It doesn't like Scythians. The Scythians were a group of nomadic, fierce, horse-riding, arrow-shooting, dagger-toting, horrific, pillaging, conquering people that lived in the steppes of Russia. Steppes with 2 P's. If you know the plains, the grass plains that going up into Central and Northern Asia, those are called the steppes. And these Scythians were feared because of their ability to ride a horse, holding on with their knees, and to turn all the way around and shoot an arrow while the horse is galloping. They could hold on, and they could turn around, and they could shoot. They would get people to pursue them, and then they would kill them. And then they did a lot of horrible stuff. They'd cut their heads off, crack the skulls in half like a coconut, and use them as their dishes. They ate and drank out of skulls, and they did all kinds of stuff. They were kind of like modern ISIS brutality is what they were like. But the Scythians lived in the steppes going up toward Russia, and you say, so what? What does that mean today? If you go to the Kremlin, now that should ring a bell, the Kremlin. That's kind of the, Washington, D.C., Smithsonian, National Mall area of Russia, the Kremlin. They have their big museums in the Orthodox Church, and of course the head of their military there. Did you know the first museum you go to, the Smithsonian of Moscow, the front, I know because I go there. I used to teach in Russia, and we would always get off the train and go through the Kremlin and see everything. And I remember the first time I stumbled in and I went, what? Scythians? You're proud of them? They're proud of their heritage. Those were conquering people that conquered all the way down. The furthest south they went is they conquered a town 5 miles south of the Sea of Galilee in Israel. And it was called up until the 8th century Scythopolis, the city of the Scythes, the Scythians. So who claims them? Russia? So no matter what anybody says, oh, Russia is not in the Bible, the Scythians are. They're named, and they lived, look at what 39 says, they lived in the land of Meshech and Tubal, and they lived, verse 2, in the far north, and they come against, God says the Scythians from the steppes that founded Scythopolis in Israel and are featured in the Kremlin in Russia to this day, are going to, look at verse 3, they're going to come from the far north against the mountains of Israel, and they're going to attack Israel and be defeated. That's interesting. Verse 6, have you been looking at this? This is one of the places that some very reputable people see Israel in, or American prophecy, and it says, and I will send fire on Magog and on those who live, look at this, in security, in the coastlands, and then they shall know that I am the Lord. And what they say, that the people who live in the coastlands securely is us. If you think about it, we've been insulated. Remember, all the 100 Years' War in Europe, we didn't have any problem with that. The 30 Years' War, we didn't have a problem with that. We had our own little civil war, which killed 500,000 of us, but we basically only went into World War I because we were attacked. But basically, this country has thrived in every way because we have an ocean on both sides. And until missiles and airplanes, it was very hard to do anything to us. We were very secure in our coastlands, and so that is one place might not be in end-day prophecies is because fire, when Russia attacks Israel, it says simultaneous with that fire hits the people living securely in the coastlands. That, for those who have trouble sleeping at night, would be a thermonuclear exchange. And you say, oh, but our military is too good for anything like that to happen to us. Yeah, it is too good, but we're entirely dependent on technology. The only thing about Russian military equipment is you can run it through the mud, throw sand in it, and dump a bucket of water, and it still runs. In America, if it's not, in white glove pristine condition, it's so high tech that it can bog down. China, last week, launched a satellite killer, and they now have a movable, they can start knocking out satellites. We have about 400 military satellites that are watching everybody breathing all over the world. China can now systematically wipe them out. Russia's developing the same thing. The only edge we have is electronic and high tech, and if you knock that out, they certainly, America, I don't know, if we have any 50 megaton bombs, they have, Russia is big. We're precise. And what they do, America has these ICBMs, they have all these little bomblets in them, and they will only hit right there. And Russia just puts one out and it does everything. And that's just brute force. So for those that are loving, can't sleep at night, they say that America gets wiped out in verse 6 of chapter 39. Fine. But that, is possible or not possible. We aren't mentioned in the future. But let's look at Ezekiel 38 because there is one more. Well, I do want to show you one more thing in Revelation. But look at Ezekiel 38:13 because this is another error. There are two parts to this error. In Ezekiel 38, it says Sheba Dedan. Now, if you know anything, those are the descendants of Abraham. Abraham had many more children than just Ishmael and Isaac. And if you read, Abraham lived on after his beloved wife died, and he married more and begat children, and they became the people of the East. And a lot of these descendants of his are the desert nomadic people, not just the Ishmaelites that came through his son Ishmael, but also the other descendants that came through his other wives. But that's all just normal. But look at the middle of verse 13, the merchants of Tarshish. Now this is where in the old days people would interpret Tarshish as equaling Britain. And so Tarshish is Britain. You say so. And so the merchants of Tarshish and the New King James says young lions or merchants is a variant of that. So Tarshish's merchants or young lions are descendants from Tarshish. So what they're saying is the American colonies, the 13 colonies, are the young lions, the lions of Tarshish. Well, the problem is in the Bible, most likely Tarshish is Spain. When Paul wanted to go to Tarshish and went on his missionary journeys, Most of the Bible scholars of the Pauline life say he went down into Spain. And so it's very hard to equate Tarshish as Britain and then the 13 colonies. That's one error. So I would say, don't see the U.S. in Ezekiel 38. Don't see the U.S. in Revelation 12, the eagle. That's eisegesis. That's reading into the scriptures. That's not letting the scriptures speak out. So I see America not in prophecy, because probably all of our excessive debt that we have built up. Remember, Proverbs says, debt is going to make you become a servant to someone who you owe the money to. You have to serve them. We owe money to everybody in the world. We have more debt in America than all the other nations put together. Our trillions and trillions and trillions. And if you add to it the promises we've made, we could buy the whole world. So it's possible that America will economically implode or collapse. That's very possible. Or, there are really three things that could happen to America. The economic collapse, or the kind of like a civil war, look what's going on right now. Are you watching the news? How they've taken over a federal building somewhere over a ranch somewhere, and all the militias are getting involved. Here's a good one. At the Rapture, there are so many believers, there are more believers in America that are all over the place in key positions. And if they were removed, it would affect this country, which is kind of like the Left Behind Tim LaHaye series. So, economic collapse, civil war, rapture, or worse. In America's past hope as far as being a Christian nation. We never were a Christian nation, but what we're supposed to do is still go into all the world and lead individuals to Christ. I don't ever think we're going to have a national revival. I wouldn't lay awake at night hoping for it, but we can have local personal pockets and lead people to Christ.